You're listening to episode 169 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness researchers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Our guests today are Lorraine Hobbs and Amy Balentine, speaking about their new book, The Self-Compassion Workbook for Kids. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the episode. And today we have two guests that we're speaking with. The first is Amy Balentine. Amy, if you want to say hi and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hello there. I am a psychologist. I live in Memphis, Tennessee, and I own and operate a center called the Memphis Center for Mindful Living. I'm also a mindfulness teacher, and so we do mindfulness trainings there. And so that is just a very brief sketch of who I am and how I am oriented into this practice.
Great. Thank you. And our other guest is Lorraine Hobbs. Lorraine, if you want to reintroduce yourself to folks who haven't heard from you here on this podcast for a few years.
Right. Thank you so much for having us, Ted. So I am the Director of Youth and Family Programs at UCSD Center for Mindfulness, and I am co-creator of the Mindful Self-Compassion for Teens teacher training program and the curriculum itself. And I don't practice psychotherapy anymore, but I was trained as a family therapist, which has really been helpful in moving into this line of work. And I'm co-author of the Teaching Self-Compassion to Teens, and now this new book, this workbook that Amy and I have just put out, which is Self-Compassion Workbook for Kids.
Great. Thank you very much. Good to see you again. And as mentioned, our topic for today is the Self-Compassion Workbook for Kids. And I love the subtitle on this one, Fun Mindfulness Activities to Build Emotional Strength and Make Kindness Your Superpower, which is a really nice way of putting it. So I think that was just beautifully said. And I noticed right away when I got my copy is you got the foreword by Kristen Neff, which is terrific. And Amy, I'm wondering if you might just say a bit about why that's important for folks who might not be familiar with mindfulness and compassion, what that significance of that is.
Yes. Well, so Kristen Neff is the pioneer, really pioneer researcher in self-compassion. She and Chris Germer. So, yes, it was quite a gift that she was willing to read this and review it and write the foreword for us. It meant a lot to have her support in this workbook.
Yeah, it was very nice to see. And the title is wonderful too, just on that it's a workbook. And as I go through this, there's so many wonderful things, but I want to hear from each of you about what made you decide to collaborate on this book. How did that come about? And maybe Lorraine, we can start with you on that.
Oh gosh, it's certainly been a labor of love, and it's taken a very long time to create this book. It's just been several years. But what brought us together? I think Amy and I had really been developing this mindfulness and self-compassion 6-week program for kids and parents. And, I think we both, based on our clinical experience and what we love and believe in, really wanted to bring something in written form, workbook style exercises, meditations to kids out there in the world that may not have access to the course itself. Yeah, but we've been working together for a while anyway, and it just seemed like a good natural fit. And, we decided to collaborate to bring this into the world of children and parents and professionals. Yeah.
Thank you. And Amy, for you, anything you want to add to that on how this got started and maybe what that creative process was like for you?
Sure, sure. Well, first, I should say that Lorraine was my mentor, my MBSR teacher training mentor, and that is how we connected. And I really loved her as a mentor. I learned so much, and so I just, for me, it was terrific to have the opportunity to continue to work together and for our relationship to shift into collaborating together. So I did my training there at the UCSD Center for Mindfulness. And then my focus clinically is on children and adolescents, so it just felt like a really natural fit that we would work together on something with the pediatric population. And it was interesting because when we had co-created that class, and we had talked with New Harbinger, we actually were originally going to be writing a manual for how to teach mindfulness and self-compassion to children, but they were wanting to have more research behind that training we had created first. But they said, you know what? Actually, we could go ahead and do that as a workbook. And so the interesting thing is that while we were creating this workbook, we also were getting support and getting connected with some researchers in Florida who are actually now researching the program we created that this workbook is related to. So this workbook is really an extension of that program. So we're excited actually to, behind the scenes of all this, be working with researchers on that.
That's terrific. I hope to hear more about that. Maybe we can talk about it again. And you've been referencing a program. I'm wondering, is that A Friend in Me? Is that what that
Yes.
is?
Yes, A Friend in Me, a 6-week self-compassion program for kids and their caregivers. And because of, we originally had designed this pre-pandemic, and so it was in person, but the pandemic, in a way, I guess, if you want to call it a gift, if nothing else, it helped us shift into creating a course that was online, a live online course. And what I loved about that is that it caused us to put the training in this form where kids and caregivers were doing the training together. And for anyone who works with children in this field, what you know is anytime children are learning something, they're going to learn it much more effectively if the adults around them are also learning that material and supporting it and reinforcing it. And so it allowed us to teach their parents alongside them, which of course is going to do nothing but help reinforce the material for the children.
Yeah, exactly. And a good point. And Lorraine, I wanted to ask you about, maybe you can add on to that by also describing a bit about the structure of the book and how that this really is a workbook that, there is also this program behind it that people may or may not be able to access.
Yeah, that's such a good question, Ted, and I'm glad you asked it because even though it's a workbook and whoever might take the workbook and look through it, they might be really interested in doing something in maybe chapter 8 or chapter 6 or but the truth of the matter is that this workbook is sequenced in the same way the class is. In other words, we start by building skills in children, and we don't throw them in the deep end and have them start dealing with difficult emotions. We have them really start with basic skills of self-care,
Mm.
um, and just kind of cultivating or building that awareness muscle. And then from there, they can develop a toolbox. Amy and I actually call it a toolbox, where they really, they just learn to navigate just the world of childhood and the challenges that kids face and the inner bully and how to develop that voice of a superhero. But again, the sequencing is really important. So I'd love for whoever's listening to this podcast to know that the workbook is based on this understanding that uh, when you're working with mindfulness and or self-compassion, the sequencing of skill building is really important.
Yeah,
So
Elaine, thank you
that's,
for
yeah,
bringing that up. In fact, I want to come back in a moment. I want to pause here on that particular point because it's a very big one. We'll come to the structure in a second, a little bit more about that. This is one of the challenges that I see on a regular basis, and I'd like to ask each of you what you're seeing as well, is that we know from our work that this is a gradual building of competencies, that it's not just one thing, that there are lots of different aspects to mindfulness, and
mhm.
building them in a way that we start with just finding out what's here and learning how to take care of ourselves, and then going into focusing our attention and progressively, maybe more challenging practices, is inherent with having an organized teacher led program. And that's often missing when someone says, "Oh, I'm going to download this app and I'll just, do some random stuff there." To me, that's always like grabbing random ingredients in the kitchen and throwing them in a big pan and then seeing what you get is typically not something so edible, not something so helpful. So again, thank you so much for bringing up the fact that there's a course, there's a program behind it, and it was not random. That there's a very planful approach to how we grow our competencies in mindfulness, which is not just one thing. So thank you for that. And Lorraine, I wonder if we could go a little bit more into just the structure of the book, and articulated that beautifully. We start with how to take care of ourselves, and then what are some other things that come up later on in the book in this projection, this organized delivery of building the competencies.
Well, actually, I'm going to revise what I said earlier in that it is a self-care. It's an approach to self-care for sure through self-compassion and mindfulness. But we actually start with, as you can see in the book, Ted, a little invitation for kids to really reflect on whether or not they could even use some self-compassion. So Amy and I created a little survey, and and it asks basic questions like, what would I do in this situation, and what would I do in that situation? So we kind of invite or spark their curiosity about the role of self-compassion in their lives. Um, and then we move into kind of giving them some basic understanding, building a foundation in mindfulness. Again, building that awareness muscle, um, and then we introduce them to more of the self-compassion training. Again, we don't throw them into the deep end. We gradually and skillfully build yeah, build the awareness and the tools they need to even practice mindfulness and self-compassion. We invite them through sense perception into how to be in this moment, how to bring awareness into right here, right now through their senses. And then we move into loving kindness and the inner critic. So we don't get to that inner critic, which can be a much more challenging chapter for anybody. Most of us can hear our inner critic. We suffer at the hands of our inner critic, but we don't want to turn toward it and look at it and say, well, what is this? We, we want kids to have the tools to do that. So we give them a wonderful way of nurturing and soothing themselves and again, practicing self-care. Then we take that deeper dive in the chapter on the inner bully and the superhero. And this is done, and then of course we go on from there, but this is done through a lot of not just meditations and exercises, but wonderful puzzles and mapping and uh, Amy, jump in here because I'm losing what we actually offer in the book here. But there's just these great opportunities for kids to, in a fun, playful way, build some of those skills.
Yeah, Amy, what would you like to add into what we're talking about here?
Sure, sure. No, I would just agree with everything that Lorraine said. I think the meat, the hard, the difficult, challenging part, the last half of the book, like Lorraine said, is dealing with our inner bully. And it's also, there's a chapter on 7 on how to tame your inner dragon. So that's, the big difficult emotions when we get overwhelmed with, anger, worry, all of that. So there's that cognitive component of dealing with the inner critic, but then we also address dealing with those really big, difficult emotions that can overwhelm us. And so, with any of us, we don't want to dwell on the negative, but kids especially are not oriented to wanting to just sit down and deal with big, difficult emotions and negative thoughts. So we do try to do this in a very just age appropriate, fun way, um, where we are incorporating a lot of arts, crafts, like yoga, so physical movement. We also get them outdoors. So I know your question was about sequencing. So we can get into the weeds about how do we do this in an age appropriate, engaging way. But just to answer your question about sequencing, I think I'll leave my answer there.
Thank you. And actually, I want to add something in on the age appropriate part is the things that you're talking about here, like, for example, not getting into the inner critic until a bit later on when we have some base competencies around taking care of ourselves and noticing what's here. That is also so for those of you who are listening in programs for adults as well. I'm teaching a program right now, and we're in week 6, and I've only just introduced the inner critic. Because all of that up to this point has been getting us to a place where we can meet that inner critic and work with it in a way that might be helpful and not overwhelming to us. And so those principles that we see in this book for kids, it applies to adults too. So when we say age appropriate, I'm going to say 2 things. As about an hour before we talked today, I had opened up to, could I use some self-compassion, which is that, a questionnaire, that assessment of, well, what's the territory here? When I fail at something, I usually, and then some choices. When something bad happens, I usually, and a bunch of choices to get to know how I am in these situations. And every single one of these applied to me as an adult. And as I go through the book, and for those who are adults in here listening to this, as I go through this, all of these apply. It doesn't matter if you're a kid or if you are an adult, these still apply and honestly are kind of fun. And seeing things like a reminder to breathe, we all need that because that awareness is something that our brains adjust and then make things routine and get them off the plate of our cognitive load. And that's one of the reasons mindfulness is such a challenge, is even when we build a habit, other habits are habits of automaticity, and this is not. This is a habit of engagement and mindfulness, so it's a lot more challenging. Thank you for that, and thank you for the book, because it's fun. Adults, it's fun. Lorraine, please go ahead. What do you have to add here?
I just wanted to add, Ted, that what makes this book so child friendly is the fact that it's child friendly language.
Right.
The exercises, the activities, all the pieces to it are age appropriate, but the language is very important when you're working with kids. And that the way we describe the different activities really speaks to them in a way that is more, it can engage them more, can invite them more into the experience. But I also want to say that I just came back from France and Israel, where I kind of promoted the book. And many of the adults, and even here in the US, many of adults who have seen the book have said what you just implied a minute ago. I could use this. I could take this workbook and do it on myself. It's really interesting. So the language is age appropriate for kids, but it speaks to everyone. I think the invitation is to just stop and pay attention to the experience at hand. And and as we progress through the chapters, we really teach kids that interoceptive body awareness, that tracking your experience in the body, in the way of emotion and where that emotion lives in the body as sensation. And Tanya Singer is this amazing social neuroscience scientist, and she really talks about how when we can cultivate the skill of being fully present, we develop empathy. we learn to become more resilient. We recover more easily from whatever the situation might be that can be challenging or uncomfortable or even frightening for children. So the skill building happens on in many ways on a subtle level. Kids don't know that that's what they're developing, that they're this insula, the part of the brain that's responsible for all of that. They don't know that they're building that part of the brain, but they're building neuroplasticity and they're building strengths and skills that can really help them, especially through these very turbulent times.
Yeah, and I want to add in something that you just said that's a very important part of this is um, that there are implicit parts to how you've crafted this book, where you might not explicitly say, what we're doing here is engagement with affect. It is an adult term and a psychological term. What we are doing is modeling it built into the exercises, which are not focused on avoidance or suppression, which we know is not an effective long-term strategy. It's about engagement, and that's simply built into what is part of that without having to say, well, yeah, we're turning towards, and here's all of the scientific research around it. It's just part of doing the practice itself and being with what's showing up. Amy, did you want to add anything on this part?
Hmm. Um, Not on that part, no, but I think it is so important with kids that like you said, that this is a fun, engaging approach, and they don't actually always have to know explicitly. I mean, that's nice too. But first, you want to get the engagement and the buy-in, and they find themselves doing it and enjoying it, and then sure, then we can be a little. And there is actually a tiny bit of neuroscience in here. There's like, one page, I think, but we try to be light on that and heavier on the practices.
Yeah, this is very much a fun wax on, wax off, slowly teaching the skills that show up when you need them. So let's get into a little bit of detail in putting this thing together. And you've got, I think, for goodness, 80 different activities that are part of this. And so there's a lot in here, and they're all bite-sized. They're all very digestible and approachable. And I love the way it's crafted such that a kid can do it on their own with a social context, a family member, wherever it happens to be. So there are lots of options, and it makes it very, very accessible. I'm curious from each of you what maybe some of your favorite exercises in the book are. Maybe ones that you use in your own teaching or with family members yourself, or that really speak to you. Maybe you're in your own practice as well. What comes to mind? Maybe Lorraine, if there's something that you want to start with, and then Amy, if you have something too.
I think the most fun part for me in creating this book, this workbook, there are three things that really stand out. One was the way we worked with the inner bully and the superhero. In the adult courses, they don't really develop a superhero image or the language that a superhero might have. They do it in more overt ways, but this was fun. Like Amy came up with the idea of building a superhero shield, and then we took the warrior pose and made it a superhero warrior pose, yoga warrior pose for the kids. I love that. Super mindfulness, man. I love that.
And
It's
for
Superman
folks who are
costume.
listening and can't see, we've been talking about superheroes, and I have a Superman cape that my wife got for me that says Super Mindfulness Man right here. I was just showing that on screen. Superhero thing applies to adults too. I'm just saying.
Oh, we needed a picture of
Okay,
you in our workbook
stand
on that one.
corrected. Yeah, we should have. I stand corrected. You're right. So, I guess the point is, we can get so creative in this work, and of course, that's really important with kids. As Amy said, getting the buy-in is so important, and when we do things in a clever, creative, fun-filled way, it's really going to help them cultivate the curiosity they need to turn toward whatever it is they're challenged with or by. So the superhero was so much fun. Um, the other one that was really, really, I don't know why this always stands out in my mind, but we, in the, I think it's in the chapter on difficult emotions, I think it's in that chapter, we're talking about, you know, life can absolutely be full of lemons. I don't know, I don't remember exactly how it's worded, but the whole idea that there are these challenges and they're like lemons, they can be sour, they can be difficult. And, and so then we, after that particular exercise, then we give them a recipe to make homemade lemonade. So they're taking the lemons and making lemonade. I don't know why. It just like we have so many fun, creative activities in this book. And the other ones really have to do with the loving kindness. You know,
Yeah.
we just have page after page of really fun activities that invite kids to learn to be kind and loving with themselves, to befriend themselves. And that's not always easy. You know, you take kids who grow up in difficult circumstances, maybe the parenting wasn't exactly what they needed. Maybe the attachment was a little challenged in the beginning. Maybe they don't have that sense of good self esteem or good feelings about themselves. It's not easy for them to turn toward themselves with loving kindness and, you know, compassion and the whole idea of just befriending themselves. But through it all, I think through it all, we approach this training, this skill building with sensitivity, with awareness, and really invite them to become just curious about their experience. It's not heavy-handed. It's not too serious. Yeah, and I think it's just a wonderful way to build skills in kids.
Yeah. Amy, how about for
So,
you? What are some of your favorite parts to the book?
Yeah, a couple of things. So Lorraine did mention the loving kindness. And so one that we actually not too long ago did with our family from the book, there's one that's called Planting Seeds of Kindness. And so you actually take pots and you decorate them, you know, like little clay pots, and you plant seeds and grow. And, you know, that's our metaphor for growing kindness. And so my oldest son just went off to college this past fall. And so one of the activities we actually did before he left was we all um, decorated pots together. So mind you, I've got they were 18
Oh,
and 16 at the time. We literally sat at the table, spent an hour together as a family, planting, you know, these seeds, decorating pots, and we put on there wishes that we wanted for ourselves, that we could all be wishing for each other. Like even as he was going away to college, he would know that at home, you know, we are sitting there sending good, kind thoughts and wishes and prayers all for his particular concerns, and then he could do that for us. So in our windowsill, we actually do have all four pots with herbs decorated. And every time I'm, you know, washing dishes, I can look and check and see what, you know, what is so important to each one of us that I can have in my heart. So I can just tell you all, there is no age too old to do this. And it really meant something, you know, to all of us that we did that. So that's one that I can tell you has been tested and approved by my family. And you know, they're not always easy audience members, let me tell you, my kids, but this one they went for. And another one is, you know, to me, another really important concept close to my heart is just integrating nature into our lives and just the healing power of nature, and integrating mindfulness to nature is really important. And it's also important to Lorraine. So we actually snuck that into the workbook, trying to get kids out into the natural world and integrating those concepts. So I love the practices that actually invite kids to the outdoors to do these practices, and we have them you know, integrating like gratitude with nature. There was one there's like creating a gratitude stick, and they go out and outside and they find a stick and think about what they're grateful for and decorate it. So that was kind of a personal favorite that we could actually weave that in, you know, even into a workbook.
great. Thank you so much for sharing. So I do want to ask what when they're you're talking with parents about the book, are there some things you want them to know if they're looking at this or maybe the program itself? What kinds of things might you share with parents who might be looking at this? Amy, maybe you can start and then Lorraine add in.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that that I share a lot with parents, actually, oh, there are so many things. This is a really important question. I will really restrain myself and let Lorraine share some. Um, what do I even want to lead with? I guess one thing that I'm going to lead with is it matters so much to kids that they are doing this in the context of a family that also supports it and practices it. And I will just tell you that kids um, are going to be just 10 times more likely to do the practices if their parents are doing them also. And that even when the kids are not enthusiastic about it, which will happen, it will happen, when they see their parents continually going back to the mindfulness practices themselves, you will hear that at some point your kids are also picking it up. It might be in their own way, it might not be exactly the way you're doing it, but we just hear story after story. That's one of the things I will tell you is that kids will pick it up. It will be in their own way. It won't look like exactly like what you're expecting, but the more they are swimming in an environment of mindfulness that is embodied by the parents in both attitude and practices, they will be picking it up. So that is one thing. And I can always come back later because I want to give Lorraine a chance, but that is one major point I'd like to make.
Lorraine, how about for you?
Yeah, I agree with Amy, Ted, that this is such an important question, whether it's with teachers or with parents. Um, as a matter of fact, in our course, the A Friend in Me course, we actually added an extra 30 minutes where we meet with just the parents at the end. And it's just like a coaching session because that's how important having parents understand their role in the development or cultivation of these skills in their children. First of all, we really help them understand the importance of their having their own personal practice because self-regulation we know can lead to co-regulation. The other thing that's really, really important is encouraging parents to not make the practice mandatory, to not make it a battle, make any of the practices a battleground. Inviting kids to come into their own understanding and their own practice does take time, as Amy suggested, um, and it's best learned when parents are willing to engage themselves. And instead of saying, "What did you learn in your practice?" it's more an attitude of sharing, "Wow, I noticed this and I learned that, and oh my goodness." So when kids can hear the value and the benefit from a parent sharing their own experience, it takes the tension out of, well, did you get something out of it? What did you get out of it? There is no forcing someone to practice or to build these skills. Um, excuse me. So, I, to me, the most magical word in all of this training is curiosity.
Yeah.
And I love that that parents can bring that attitude of curiosity into the home or into teachers into the classroom and through invitation help them begin to build these skills.
Yeah. Thank you. Beautifully said. Amy, another side. I know you have a lot of things you'd like to say on this, but maybe one other important one for
Yeah, I'll
parents.
limit it to one other. Um, So oftentimes, there is a felt need that usually brings people to this, right? So oftentimes for parents, they might have a child who's experiencing some dysregulation. So maybe they have a child who tends to throw tantrums, or perhaps a child who tends to be very, very anxious. And so they're looking for tools, they're looking for support. And so often, and quite understandably, parents are wanting to jump to using those skills in those most difficult moments. Let's teach them how to breathe deeply, and now let's immediately use that in the most of difficult circumstances. And so what I would say is yes, sometimes we can jump there pretty quickly, but more often than not, it really is a process. It's a learning. It takes time. And so I just want to encourage parents to be willing to learn it and do the practices when times are good and calm, and that trusting that if that is used over time, that kids will develop capacity and then they will be able to use those during the difficult emotional times. Sometimes I just see parents almost like throwing their hands up in frustration when the child is not able to immediately use the skills under the most difficult of circumstances. And so I just want to encourage patience. I want to encourage people to trust the process. I'll tell you, I once did our training when it was live in person with some kids, some little boys who were all pretty hyperactive, some who had anger issues. If you looked at the class they were, in with me, you would not have seen a row of, quiet, calm children. It was a rather boisterous class. But I will tell you that I heard from someone, it was funny, it was like a community member who just happened to come in and say, I've heard about your classes because there was this kid, at my school who was always having these outbursts. And we just saw him on the playground, sitting down, and we thought something was wrong. And we went up and checked on him, and he was sitting there doing his breathing because he had been really upset by something. And so you never know. At some point, it's going to catch on. They're going to start using it. But we didn't lead with that with him. We were leading with just learning the practices when times were good and calm. So I guess that's the other encouragement I want to give to parents.
Thank you. And I know there's a lot more we could say, and that's part of having depth to a program and a workbook like this is there is a lot in there. And that's part of our trust in giving it a try and seeing what's here, especially made by experts who really know this field in particular very well, because it's a different kind of thing when doing a mindfulness training or a self-compassion training or a mindful self-compassion training for adults in a different context. And you approach that very beautifully. I also wanted to just quickly note before I ask for last thoughts from each of you is that there are recordings also available that New Harbinger has set up, and there is a link to that in the book itself. And I did check that out before we had a conversation today. So the recordings that are helpful to what you see in the book, those of you who are listening, I'll put a link to that in as well on the webpage for this episode, so you'll get a chance to take a look at that as well. But I wanted to ask each of you any last reflections that you'd like to share with the listeners about the book, or if they're maybe in their own engagement with self-compassion, what might you share as an encouragement or some thoughts? Lorraine, maybe we could start with you.
Good question, Ted. Um, I think the most encouraging thing I can say to parents or professionals who would be wanting to bring this into the lives of the kids they work with or they have in their own family is to be curious and not intrusive, to build your own personal practice and from there guide your children. I'll just tell a really quick story about a parent. Before the online course, we had the in-person courses, but again, like Amy, they were just the kids. The parents weren't involved yet. And I remember one situation where I think it was the second or third class. The parent said to me, "What are you doing in there?" And I said, uh, "Well, what do you mean?" She said, "Well, the other day my daughter was coming down the stairs, a little 9-year-old, coming down the stairs, and she really looked distressed. And as a parent, I was concerned. And I said to her, um, you know, what's wrong? Are you okay?" And she looked at me and she said, I don't feel good right now, but I know if I name it, I can tame it. So this concept kind of stuck with the child, and and luckily the parent did not become intrusive and say, "Well, tell me more. I want to know more." And kind of intrude into that child's experience. she just let the child skip off, and she was kind of excited and curious herself, and then she came to be with the question. So I think really making space, making enough room. All parents and professionals have to do is create that safe container so kids can really be encouraged and invited into an awareness of their own experience. So I think that's what I would say.
Thanks, Lorraine. Amy, how about you?
Thanks. Yeah, I just would underscore everything that Lorraine said. I would just say I would invite people to really have fun with this. I would really invite parents. We all need, as parents, as educators, as mental health professionals. Um, I can tell you we all need self-compassion. And sometimes doing this work with kids, we get discouraged, and sometimes they're not necessarily kind to us. Sometimes those critical voices can come from the kids themselves, and we can doubt ourselves. We can get discouraged. And so really these practices are first for ourselves, and when we can hold ourselves and our experience with compassion, um, that creates the environment in which kids can then be invited to it, be excited about it, be more drawn into self-compassion for themselves. I will always go back to it starts with us first. That really is the key. And I want to invite you all to hold it lightly. And so even though you've heard us talk about doing this sequentially, if you run into bumps where kids are not engaged with one particular activity, you know what? Just go to the next one. And if you have to skip some things to keep engagement up, do it. It's really okay. And just with my own family, there'll be seasons where we're into it. It's much easier to get them involved, times when they're not. But the important thing is that I keep my practice up, and then I keep coming back to them, and then we keep coming back, and we ask what they're needing, and so I just want to encourage people to be consistent and yet hold this all with a light touch.
Great. Thank you, Amy. Well, yeah, go ahead, Lorraine, please.
I just want to add one other thing, Ted, about what inspired Amy and I to create this workbook. And really, for me, it had to do with the fact that preteens, and that's really who this book is oriented to, preteens haven't really gotten into the challenges of adolescence yet. They're still like little sponges taking in so much of the world around them. And you may know, I think we all know the challenges that teens today in this difficult changing world are faced with. I mean, there are challenges in adolescence, period, but now they seem to be mounting and much more problematic for the generation today. Um, so the whole idea that we can um, arm these, oh, that's maybe not the best word, but we can arm these kids with tools that can really support them might make such a difference as they enter into adolescence.
Yeah, very good point. Being a kid's tough enough already, and it's a very different kind of environment. It has become very challenging for so many different reasons. Thank you for that thought. So for those who are listening, the Self-Compassion Workbook for Kids, I will have a link to the book on the episode page for this episode, along with a couple of other links for you as well. Our guests today have been Amy Balentine. Amy, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Lorraine Hobbs. Lorraine, thanks. Good to see you as well.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure to be with you again, Ted.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come and visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.